Welcome back into The Whistle, the sports show that tries not to be like the media. I'm your host, Jackson James, and today's a very sad episode. Today is one of those episodes that I did not want to make, but I kind of knew that I was going to make. This is my Cowboys reaction to the loss that the Cowboys suffered against the 49ers in the divisional round. Somber times. Us as Cowboys fans know the feeling of disappointment. It's nothing new. But I just want to say it was a great season. It can't be too greedy, but obviously we expect more because we should expect more being the Dallas Cowboys. And I just think it's just a very disappointing end. There's people to be blamed, and there's people that should not be blamed. And I will get into that. But let's just hop right into it. Let's start with the main topic of discussion, which is Dak. Look, this game is Dak's fault. I love Dak. I love the character, great leader, but he cost us with his performance. And I think his performance in this game kind of represents the performance that he had throughout the season. His lack of awareness has affected him this entire season. And I don't want to razz on the interceptions because probably a third of those interceptions aren't his fault, but the other 2/3 are clearly his fault. And both of these interceptions this game are his fault. Now, look, interceptions happen, turnovers happen. It's how you overcome them, but it's also the situations that they occur, right? And we're driving down the field. It's 6-3. No, sorry, it's 6-6. And we're on inside their 40, right? And you can say we have 3 in the bag. Now, you can't really say that because of Brett Maher, but I think in the back of your mind, you at least have 3. You got to think optimistically that you at least have 3. If it's like a 4th and 9, you're kicking the field goal. And they proved to kick the field goal later in the game, and Brett Maher made it. So, in hindsight, if you want to say that, they had the 3, right? And you can't, he did not see the field clearly at all. And you can't say the pressure got to him because if I look at the stats real quick and you look at the defense, and if it'll show me sacks, can I get total sacks? They had a total of 3 sacks, which is not the best, but also it's not like you're getting pressured a whole lot, right? And they had 4 QB hits. So, like, the pressure was at the beginning of the game. The pressure was there, and you could see Dak got off to kind of a shaky start, right? But clearly, the philosophy just did not work for Dak, and I think Kellen Moore tried to at least adjust to get the short pass game out, but clearly that did not work. So, this game, I don't think it's on Kellen Moore. I think some of it is on Kellen Moore for sure. But clearly not as much as Dak. Dak cost this team at least 3, but it's really 6 points and maybe even 9 points, because you cost them yourself 3 points at least, maybe even a touchdown, right? So that's 3 points right there. So it's still 6-6. But then you give the 49ers a chance to kick the field goal as time expires at the end of the first half. So that's up to 6 points because it's a point swing, right? Not only did you cost us 3 points, but you gave them 3 points, right? And then the first interception, you clearly gave them 3 points because our defense pretty much played lockdown for the entire game. And that transitions into my second point, that the defense played their butts off. And if we have an average performance from Dak, we probably have a closer chance to win this game. Look, I can give my shout out to Micah Parsons, one hell of a game. DeMarcus Lawrence, one hell of a game. And then Van Der Esch. Van Der Esch was the key to this defense, and we clearly saw it today and even last week against Tampa Bay. It'll be really interesting to see what we do with LVE in this offseason. I think we should re-sign him if we want to keep the core of this defense, because linebacker, I think, is almost the most important position. It's not the most valuable, pass rush is, but it's the most important, or at least the key to your defense, because you don't have a good linebacker, Middle linebacker, you're low-key kind of screwed because your pressure can get there on runs and passes, but then if you don't have coverage linebackers or tackling linebackers, you're screwed. But my main pick with the defense is Trevon Diggs. Trevon Diggs is soft. He is the most soft most soft cornerback in the league. Absolutely. What does Trevon Diggs provide, right? So luckily, hopefully he saves us some money because hopefully we don't pay him, because I've been watching his games and he is not special in any category, right? This season, like last season he was great, right? Ball skills were all over the place. It was risk and reward with him, right? Because he got burnt a lot. But then the Eagles, I think if you look at a couple of games this season, you look at the 49ers game, you look at the Eagles game, and then if you look at the Titans game, right? Titans game, not really, but there's one play. And that'll come in. Look, Trevon Diggs, he's not a lockdown corner. He's not a shutdown corner, right? You could say, well, he held Mike Evans. Yeah, it's mostly team. Shutting down a wide receiver is more of a team effort, unless it's clearly one-on-one coverage. And I haven't seen any stats where Diggs has been one-on-one completely. I think rarely in the NFL against a star receiver, you're going to go one-on-one with your corner, with your best corner. You're at least going to have a safety over the top, which completely changes the play for the cornerback. But look, he's not a shutdown corner. Okay, so at least he can pick off the ball, right? No. As I'm going to look at his season stats, I think he only has 3 or 4 picks this season. Which, yes, it's hard to get interceptions, right? It's absolute. I'm not saying it's an easy thing. That's what makes interceptions so special. That's what made his season last year so special. He had 3 picks this season. 3. Right? So he wasn't picking off the ball this season. Okay. So hopefully at least he can play a team role and make some tackles, right? This dude doesn't tackle. He's not physical. And the play in the 49ers game that completely represents this is the Kittle bobble catch, right? If Diggs lowers the shoulder properly, or at least tries to grab him, that's an incomplete pass. He went head down, kind of braced himself for the hit, and it wasn't anywhere close. And Kittle made the play, and that really set their offense up to score that drive. And then later in the drive, he drops a pick. And you can't say, well, it was tipped. He literally was looking at the ball while it was in his hands, and he dropped it. So if he catches that ball, if he picks off that play, or if he stops the Kittle play, we have a better chance to win this game, because we just have a way better chance of winning this game. Now look, is that necessarily all on Diggs? No, of course not, right? Our defense kind of ran out of gas, and you could blame it on the short rest. You can blame it on the short rest. You can blame it on the 49ers having a longer time to prepare, but I think it's just on the offense, right? The offense wasn't providing a spark. 12 points, 1 touchdown. Come on now. Now look, I think in terms of our offense, right? They didn't really. What made the Cowboys so special in 2016 and 2018, which were really good teams, but the one stigma came back to the quarterback, was they were able to run the ball, right? Zeke's rookie year and then Zeke's best year, you could probably say, was 2018, right? And they were able to run the ball, right? But then when they were stopped, not able to run the ball, Dak struggled and the offense struggled. So you look at this game, nobody had over 27 yards rushing. Now, look, I know Tony Pollard went out with injury, but that's horrible. That is horrible. Zeke, I think, is done as a Cowboy, which kind of sucks because I was a big Zeke homer going into this season, but I was quickly humbled by the emergence of Tony Pollard. Hopefully we can franchise tag Tony if we can release Zeke, but if you can't, you can't spend too much money on a running back. I just don't think you can. Tony's special, but if that takes away from your offensive line, or if that takes away from your defensive line or your other skill positions, I don't think it's worth it. If we have to pay Tony Pollard over CeeDee Lamb, that's not worth it. And I'll get into wide receivers a little bit later, but Zeke had 10 carries for 26 yards, 2.6 average, with a long of 5 yards. That's bad. Tony Pollard, before injury, got 6 carries for 22 yards, averaging 3.7, and his long was 10, right? And I think you could see with Tony, Like if you run it with him at least, he'll get like at least 5 or 6 a pop, right? He had a couple bad carries due to some tackles for loss by the 49ers, but come on. Yeah, we were held in check running the ball. And then Dak was only able to throw 23 completions for 206 yards and a passer rating of 63.6 and a QBR of 51.5. Bad, right? But if you look at the opponent, right, and you look at how we held Christian McCaffrey in check, 10 carries for 35 yards, 3.5. So Tony was actually averaging more per carry than Christian McCaffrey. So that's pretty good, right? But Elijah Mitchell, at the end of the game, maybe fresh legs because they were running Christian McCaffrey more, averaged 3.6 a carry for 14 carries for 51 yards and a long of 13. And that was kind of towards the end when they're running at the clock, which is really depressing because you know they're going to run the ball. So I think our defense is physical enough to stop the run, and I think they showed that pretty much for the first 3 quarters, and then they just ran out of gas, right? And then we held their passing in check except for George Kittle. George Kittle bit us on big plays. It wasn't short plays, it was big plays with Kittle, but everyone else we sort of held in check, right? Deebo Samuel, 4 for 45, and then nobody had more than 27 receiving yards after that. Kittle had 5 for 54, or 5 for 95, which is really good with a long of 31, which I'm pretty sure is that bobble catch. Or maybe it was another play, but that's bad. And that was 5 for 5 on targets. Every time Purdy threw to him, it was caught. Which I don't know if you can blame on Javon Curse, who was covering most of the time, or the defensive scheme, but Kittle ate us up this game. In last year's game, he didn't do much. I think he had 2 catches for like 17 yards maybe. So that's the really interesting part. But I want to get away from this game, right? And at the end of the season, right, I think it's time to look forward because you can't really look back because it's going to be really sad. So what are the next steps? The more I look at those stats, the more I'm like, maybe this isn't the biggest concern, but the first thing I have as a step moving forward was get secondary help. And I do think that's actually prominent because we did suffer some injuries, but it's really interesting because, like, what do you do with Diggs? What do you do with Anthony Brown when he returns? What about Jordan Lewis when he returns? If you didn't know, he tore his ACL in like one of the first games, and then Anthony Brown tore his Achilles against the Colts. Yes, I think that's right. So maybe if that's the secondary help, getting those guys back to their starting caliber, right? Or maybe just drafting one. I think we have to do something there because I don't think you can stay put and say, "Oh, we're fine here." No, I think you have some stars for sure in the making in terms of what's his name? What am I looking for? Where's his name? Oh, Deron Bland. He is a young guy, but I think he can develop really well. He had great ball skills. He led us in interceptions. Malik Hooker's old, and he played some minutes. So he played some minutes, talking in NBA terms. But you have to find a replacement for him, probably. Pass rush, I think, is fine. I think we just re-signed Denora Armstrong, so that should be fine. You're gonna have to pay Micah soon, so you're gonna have to spend a lot of money on your defense, especially signing Van Der Esch, Micah, and maybe Diggs. I don't think you pay Diggs, but you have to pay Diggs at least something if you're gonna keep him. If we keep him, Israel Ukahamu, I'm pronouncing that completely wrong. But number 24 for the Cowboys, he stepped up pretty good in terms of injuries, so maybe you keep him. But it's going to be a really big question mark this offseason in terms of secondary because it doesn't matter how good your pass rush is. If you have a bad secondary, they go short pass or whatever, and then they counteract it. So I think every part of your defense is very important. Obviously, starting with your pass rush, which the Cowboys have figured out, which is a bright spot going into the future, right? But going to the other side of the ball, what do the Cowboys, or what does this offense look like? Well, like I said, you have to cut Zeke, right? Zeke has not produced this season, and it's unfortunate, right? Because you're paying him so much money. He has completely fallen off. He has lost the burst. It's a good run when he has 4 yards. That's how bad he's gotten, right? So I think you gotta cut Zeke and then maybe figure out something for Pollard. If you can get him on a good deal, you got to do it. If you get him on a short, maybe expensive deal, do it. Probably the route we're going to go is franchise tag. But then you got to figure out what you're going to do with Dalton Schultz. I think you have Gallup for one more year, and then you probably cut him. But I'll get to wide receivers in a second. Then you got to figure out Dak's plan, right? Do you draft a new QB, mature him behind Dak for a season? Do you sign a new QB? Do you sign a Derek Carr? Now, I think with Dak, right? I think what you do with Dak is you keep him, because I think it's really hard to find a franchise quarterback in the league. Now, look, is he top 10? Maybe. Probably not. He certainly didn't play top 10 this season, and I don't think you can take one game like this and say he's not top 10, right? I don't think you can look at one game, because look, you watched last week. This is how bipolar fans are after a loss. You look at last week and you're like, this guy's a top 10 guy. When he plays clean, he's a top 10 guy. You can say that for any quarterback, but when he plays bad, he's like a top 25 guy, And so it's going to be really interesting with Dak, but I think there's tools to rebuild Dak in this offense. And that starts with rebuilding the O-line, right? Tyler Smith was a great pick. He struggled somewhat in points in this season, and you kind of have to expect that from a rookie. And you're getting older, which is not a good thing, right? I think you have to continue to draft O-linemen. Like Tyler Smith is going to be a starter for a long time for us. Zach Martin, let me start from left to right. So you have Tyler Smith at left tackle. He's going to be there for a while. Now, if he moves to guard, depending on who we draft. Connor McGovern stepped in. Who was it originally? Oh, it was Jason Peters. Jason Peters is done. He might come back for another season. He was great when he was here, but you can't rely on him in the future. I think you got to get a rookie on that right side of the line. Connor McGovern, he's younger, so you could keep him, but he was a backup, right? You were using him as a fullback. Tyler Biadasz, he's still young. So that's good at least. But then you get to the left side of the line, or right side of the line, and it is definitely getting older. Look, Zach Martin, Hall of Famer, right? And I love Zach, but how many years does he have left? And that's the same problem with Tyron Smith. It's how many years he has left, but more importantly, how many games does he have left? Because he has suffered a major injury. He tore his hamstring or his quad right before the season started, and he's injury prone already. Now, look, he's a beast when he's pretty good when he plays. He's definitely in that top echelon of linemen, right? Because he's really a left tackle, but then we had to put him over at right tackle due to some injuries, and he stepped up pretty good there. So I think you got to focus on your O-line especially. But if you somehow figure out that O-line situation, the next step, wide receiver help. And this is my main key for helping Dak Prescott, along with the line. But this is the main echelon, right? I think more importantly, you got to figure out the running backs, but then it's the wide receivers. Look, CeeDee Lamb is the only wide receiver anybody, I think, on this team believes in to at least have a good game, right? You saw that catch. That was a decent throw, but that was more an impressive catch, and I think he's the only person on that team that can make that catch. Because look, here's my main thing that I know. My main key of, I had 3 keys for how Dallas beats Tampa Bay, and it was who is going to step up. What wide receiver in the wide receiver core is going to step up, and it ended up being a pretty, what's that called? Group effort. There's something else. There's another term that's called, but it was a group effort, right? You had CeeDee Lamb, who he had like a touchdown and a couple of grabs. Gallup had a touchdown. Schultz had probably the best game last week. He stepped up, right? But Dalton Schultz is very inconsistent. Noah Brown is maybe good for a catch or 2. T.Y. Hilton's good for maybe 1 catch. T.Y. Hilton, when you had to sign T.Y. Hilton, I knew this is trouble. And my main area of concern is Michael Gallup, right? You come off injury and you start slow. All right, that's fine. You start slow off an injury, no big deal. But then he continued to be slow. And he didn't have over 60 yards, I think, for the entire season, any game. And that's my main area of concern, right? And I think where the Cowboys messed up is they picked Michael Gallup over Amari Cooper. And look, do I love Amari Cooper? No. He didn't really show up on the road. He's more of a homer, which is fine. But at least he showed up sometimes, right? Gallup never really showed up. He maybe caught a touchdown here or there, but I keep seeing on social media him miss timing jumps for these balls. And it's just like, come on, man. You're our jump ball guy. You're a guy that we throw the fade to in the end zone, even though I hate the fade play. But you're the guy that can go up and get a ball, go get that catch. And he hasn't shown that all season. He showed that maybe once or twice. And it's just like, ugh, has his torn ACL really just destroyed him athletically? And I think that's something you got to address. I think we have him for one more year in terms of the contract that we signed him with. We signed him for like a 5-year deal, but like the last 3 years are voidable or something. So I think there's a lot of questions to fill, but I think wide receiver has to be a top round pick. I think you got to draft a wide receiver in the top 3 rounds, or in the first 3 rounds, probably the 3rd round, because Jalen Torbert absolutely flopped, and you got to draft a new one. Do you draft a new running back? And you draft an O-lineman, you got to draft, corner. Do you make a trade? Do you do this? Do you do that? Do you do blah, blah, blah? You know what I mean? I would have been really interesting to see this team if they signed Von Miller. And I'm just thinking about this right now, but I'm really fascinated to see how good this defense could be. And I'm really looking forward to looking at the defense next season. Now, look, if we lose Dan Quinn, we lose Dan Quinn, which would stink. But I think Mike McCarthy can hire a guy that can at least produce similar results. And that goes in my next point, my 4th point. Mike McCarthy is the guy. All right, I don't understand the blame going to Mike McCarthy. Look, that last play, who cares about the last play? Right? You have to travel 80 yards. They're trying to do something different. You've seen these flea flickers you've seen them work once in a while, but in an NFL game, when's the last time it worked? The last time someone scored on a flea flicker, it was the defense. Right? Against the Raiders, yeah. Right? And Mike McCarthy is the first coach in forever to coach back-to-back 12-win seasons. So Mike McCarthy at least knows how to beat bad teams, right? And he knows how to beat some pretty good teams, too. So Mike McCarthy's clearly the guy, and clearly offensive-centric league. Mike McCarthy is clearly the guy to lead this team to a deep playoff run whenever that happens. Now, that goes with, you got to give credit to Dan Quinn, right? Dan Quinn has saved this defense, right? Mike McCarthy's first season, the defense was atrocious, right? But now it's clearly better, and that's probably due to Dan Quinn. But if Dan Quinn leaves and then the defense falls off, then it's Dan Quinn. You know what I mean? And I think we'll see that, but I don't expect a major drop-off because that first season also didn't have Micah Parsons. So hopefully Dan Quinn stays. And then to end off, look, I'm critical of the Cowboys because I care so much, right? We got a lot of fans. And hopefully if you're a fan, let me know in the comments below if you're a fan, because we need to rally together in these hard times. And look, I'm going to root for the Cowboys. And I wrote this down, nothing will change until the Joneses are out of power. And I did make a video about how the Cowboys are broken, and that's due to Jerry Jones. But I don't think that's a lame excuse. Because first off, we draft pretty well, right? The contract situations could be better, could be worse, right? But there's something just wrong with this team, and it's kind of that insanity definition, right? If you keep doing the same thing over and over and you expect different results, you're going to get the same results. And I think that's this case with Dak and maybe Kellen Moore, right? I think you've seen in the tenure of Kellen Moore, you've seen great offensive plays. You've seen genius level decisions, but you've also seen some knuckleheaded decisions. You've seen some really bad plays from both of them. And you're just like, all right, can we get a more consistent guy? And I think in this day and age with offense, I think this would be a bad offseason to fire Kellen Moore just because there's so many offensive coordinator positions open. So I think you got to give Kellen Moore one more year. But it should be very interesting to see if there's any coaching shakeups, especially with the defensive side of the ball. And then look, I want to end this podcast off on a good note. Look, this team is better than they were last year, right? And I think you can easily see that with Mike McCarthy. And that's one thing I love about Mike McCarthy. And that's one thing I had a problem with Jason Garrett, right? Jason Garrett was what's the perfect embodiment of inconsistent, right? Like Jason Garrett, if you look at just Dak's career with Jason Garrett, right? First year, 13-3, unbelievable season, one of my favorite seasons of all time. out of any team, right? 13-3, team's absolutely dominant. Next year, 7-9, miss the playoffs. The year after that, 10-6, make the playoffs, win a playoff game. The year after that, 8-8, miss the playoffs. And then did we fire him? Yeah, because that was 2019, right? That's bad. That's like up, down, up, down, up, down. And look, you can blame that on Dak and Zeke and their whole drama throughout those seasons. But one thing I know for sure, Mike McCarthy is way better at game planning for when things don't go right? I think you can use 2015 and 2020 as two examples for the difference of these coaches, right? And this is why I'm rooting for Mike McCarthy to stay. And he's going to stay, right? 2015, this team was absolutely horrible. Horrible. I mean, a top 4 pick, right? And our quarterback was injured. Tony Romo was out, right? 2020, Dak goes down. Our team's at least decent with Andy Dalton there. When Andy Dalton was in. When Andy Dalton was out, it was atrocious because we had no third string. And we were like 2 games out of the playoffs. Now we had a sucky division. But at least with Mike McCarthy, you saw, he can coach. And then this year, right, Dak goes down again. Cooper Rush plays, 5 games? 6 games? And goes 5-1, 4-1. And then loses on the road to Philly, who's in the NFC Championship. Yeah. He's a good coach. And look, we made the divisional round, right? I think as a Cowboys fan, you got to take everything, Look, it sucks to lose, and especially sucks to lose in the divisional round again. But I'll take a playoff win rather than losing the wild card. And I'm a young fan. I don't know the 90s, right? I didn't grow up with the Cowboys winning Super Bowls. That didn't happen, right? And I don't know if last year's team beats Tampa Bay on the road. No clue, right? The offense was inconsistent this year, but at least they could beat good teams, right? Good defenses. Last year, we were inconsistent, but there was a pattern, right? We were good against bad defenses. We were bad against good defenses. But that was different this year. Last year we had a problem with penalties. This year we cleaned them up, right? And there's clear areas of improvement for this team, right? Turnovers on offense, stopping the run on defense, even though we did that. Penalties on defense maybe. But I think there is hope. There's not a lot of hope, but there's hope. And there's clear steps that I don't think any of us know that are going to be the right steps. I think there isn't necessarily a need for a blockbuster trade that some teams might need to do. Because I think where the Cowboys are at, they're at a good position, not a great position, but they're certainly not at a bad position. They still have they still have a top 15 quarterback, right? And I think if Dak gets hurt again, I think we have to expect the same thing. But if Dak can stay healthy, get a comparable wide receiver 2 for CeeDee Lamb, if tight end stays the same, that's perfect, and get a decent running game, the Cowboys should be back in the playoffs next season. I think we can at least expect them to make the playoffs. Now, if they win a game, awesome. If they win 2 games, historic. If they win 3 games, legendary. If they win another game, history books for sure. Right? That's legacy, actually, right there. So, look, I don't want to waste your time rambling anymore about the Cowboys. Look, I'm a Cowboys fan. Loved them since I started watching them in 2012. I love Dak. Love Micah Parsons. I love this team. I love the culture of former players. Right? They want us to win just as much as the fans, and that's what really makes me smile. Now, look, the worst thing about being the Cowboys fan is the media. We all have to deal with it, and it kind of feels like a punishment, It kind of feels like we kind of have to suffer through it for rooting for this team. But I would suffer through all of this for a Super Bowl, or just to poke them in their face. So hopefully this is at least a step closer. Anyways, thank you for listening. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Deuces.